The age of vendetta, the age of laws, or the age of the philosophy king. So I'm putting forward, I think we should have Vance as the world leader for life. So, one, we should realize that the choices between laws, which means, Wallerstein has said what the rule of law means internationally is what he calls hegemony. So in the Wallerstein uses the standard usage. I have to sort of always put a little parenthetical here and say, caveat emptor, because actually the true hegemon is the same as the philosophy king, only under the circumstances where one must at least provisionally admit that the theoi philosophize, which is to say they don't, rather than having the access to the ideas simpliciter, as in the mind of the God, as according to Averroes or Thomas, or I guess as according to Aristotle. I think so. It's just the difference with Aristotle is Aristotle doesn't admit that there's the creation ex nihilo, whereas those guys say there's a creation ex nihilo, but with respect to which somehow makes the access more mysterious, and then somehow it seems to me it's more like the case of the hegemon, or as the sort of transfigured version of the philosophy king, which is something more than a phronimos, but something less than the most perfect immediately reading off the divine positive law. Positive law doesn't have anything bad about it when it's God's positive law. Positive law becomes a problem when it's Locke or Machiavelli's positive law. And then, which is to say, just a law that is now on the books, which then, generally speaking, as I think in the exchange of the Glaucon it comes out, rather than the exchange of the Thrasymachus. The other side of saying that, that law is the rule of the powerful, so the hegemon in the sense Wallerstein and the general usage has it. And just to get back to that, out of this parenthetical for a second, what Wallerstein is saying is 95% of the time America gets its way in terms of international law. So that international law 95% of the time functions in order to catch in the spiderweb the ones that usually the allies of America that are too weak to do anything against America, but also to some extent through stealing foreign money, like just stealing a lot of money from Russia, and then saying this money is sort of being held in abeyance until this war is concluded. But right now we're going to have some discussions. I don't know how that works, that America sees the money, but then it's Ursula von der Leyen and the EU who are discussing it. But what they're saying is basically, since we've determined that this was a quote-unquote unprovoked invasion, so the unprovoked shows the legal status of a mens rea is against Russia. Therefore, we can, in advance of the cessation of the war, charge out of the stolen funds war reparations. And the actually, that's sort of the one of the more ridiculous. The war reparations will then go for continuing to fund the war, which would otherwise, Ukraine would collapse, and then this scenario would never happen where there would be a Ukraine to receive the reparations, because Russia would be in charge of Ukraine and build it up themselves. Um, so yeah, in this situation, we see that the um, philosophy king in this sense would be the one that would, even though they have these powers that supposedly are being abused 95% of the time, they could instead do the opposite and um, as in accordance with perfect justice and in the awareness of Schuld or guilt in Heidegger's version, in the Goethean version. They could take decisions that were as much as possible the free decisions according to justice, Socratically free decisions, not in the sense of the decisions Christ would take, but more like the decisions Socrates would take, because it's a totally different level of being we're talking about, of consciousness, and therefore it's harder to steer the ship from the point of view of Socrates. It's just that Phronimos is not in contact with, he's not receptive to everything that theos themselves would be receptive to. But all that is sort of, they're not totally, they're not totally impracticable considerations, because there are beings like, say, Eckhart Tolle, a being that really has no ego. And you could say, put this man in charge, but then the problem is he's kind of a bit of an airhead or something, and I don't know. It's sort of like when you're enlightened, or when you're in that type of state, maybe up to a certain point, it's not clear that you could make the correct pragmatic decisions. I don't know. That's a good question. But in any case, there could be a consideration of what type of person you want relative to more like Buddha, Christ, and I think, and again, I say this to be tangible about it, somebody like Eckhart Tolle, who's really, if you just observe him for a few minutes, you see he's not in the normal state of a human being, which doesn't mean necessarily something good. But taken that way, then I say, yeah, this, which would be similar to the position of Xi in China, is something like a situation where you have to say that you have a ruler for life that you think this would be better than leaving it in the current situation, which is the 95% hegemon situation, which then you would have to give an account of. So something like saying, under the current situation, we have this kind of talk, like Cheney said, between Nixon and up to his own time, there were only, inclusive of Reagan, there were only wimps in office, and therefore there needed to be something stronger, and something stronger was to say, even though in the first Gulf War we didn't get Saddam out, we're going to go back, and we deliberately want to do it unilaterally in order to show how tough we are, and to show that we don't actually care. So this is already this type of move they're saying Trump is doing. Trump has inherited this in that sense. In other words, they're saying something like, we're just going to do whatever we can do, and this is being presented when it's taken in sort of small cases as jawboning. So in other words, going to a company and then basically saying we're going to hit you with all kinds of lawsuits. We're going to do n number of things that's going to make your life unlivable. Just give us what we want, and then we'll go away. So, like in the case of, I think the U.S. has already done this in the case of Greenland, with causing them for almost nothing to allow some offshore drilling or something like that, some energy sector related things which didn't help Greenland at all, but which they were sort of suborned into doing. Taken that way, I think we could also say that there's a situation where the theory of whether, something like a system of vendetta being replaced by something like a system of law is actually in advance. So for the reason I just tried to say, like, if the system of law is really this 95% of the time the people wielding the law do whatever they want, doesn't it put the theory of the law in a different light? But then we have to still remember the de facto benefits of sort of up to a point knowing what to expect, especially if you aren't sort of within hailing distance of the sort of center of power itself, where shots are fired, so to speak. So so that's like what they used to say about the Soviet Union. As long as you didn't mess around with politics, then it was actually, for most people, most of the time, it was not especially a problem. But if you're in some kind of close vicinity to politics, then then that's the danger of the situation. But if you see the current system in that light, then it seems to me it makes more attractive the third possibility, where you simply say we're going to hope that we're going to give the full sovereign powers, but we're going to deliberately hope to put in somebody for life who in some way will exercise something like fair rulership, so far as that's capable of, as it were, human beings who still are bloodhounds that have the sense of the nauseousness of the blood in their nostrils, and only can lead in some way, in a stumbling way, and can't be totally don't have total access to the correct way to steer the ship of state. So taken that way, this sort of how does one call that, concession to reality doesn't seem like the worst thing. And then we see the case lit up. So we see the case lit up in China, where if you follow Stephen Kotkin, you get continuously this case shown to you of what is China up to? And China is up to inoculating itself against the possibility of ending up like the Soviet Union. And this is what he's constantly harping on. But if this is so, then what it means is they're also inoculating themselves against the possibility of becoming like the United States. And this happens in the sense that they don't want to become the state ruled by businessmen, ruled by the transactional people who will, so on occasion when they want to kill Saddam Hussein, the leader of another country, or other cases can be given. Obama decided, we have to go to war with Syria, we have to go to war with Libya. They've offended our global system too much. So if you have this kind of wild power under the rule of the banks, or the rule of the dark state, isn't the power of Xi rather better? That would be the claim. And then, so I don't see why Kotkin is trying to argue for so-called the liberal democratic way of life, as Marx put it, if the liberal democratic way of life is actually this way of life of the this businessman killer, this one who will use sort of both the strategies of the businessman who's transactional and the legal system, the full legal system, to get 95% of the time to rule by law rather than to rule for law. Why is this better? Why is it more desirable than the what they have in China? Becomes more murky, I would claim here. Let's remember for a second one of the leading statements of liberalism itself, as given. Usually it's attributed to Friedrich the Grosse, Frederick the Great, but it's given by Kant, where he says, Resoniert so viel Welt und vorbar ihr wollt, aber gehorcht. So, reason and talk and discuss, argue all that you want, and then it's usually put but obey, but I think gehorcht can mean but hearken. But what are you hearkening to? What is it that you're supposed to obey? It would be the same law that's under question and that's supposedly replaced the system of vendetta and brought in the new enlightened thing. But this is actually, if it's not guided properly, then if it becomes a matter of a bureaucratic interpretation of text according to what somebody says it meant 250 years ago, if the original sense of finding out what the law is according to the ideas buried in the world, but only revealed slowly through the law of precedent, through the building up by the making of the law, through the art of taking cases of casuistry. All this falls into question. Why are we so? We can't ask this. We're not asking these questions directly enough because we're constantly asking them within this sort of congealed forces that are artificially, through their great proficiency, holding back the kind of storm of the real issues. They keep saying no, but you have to think about things in terms of an analysis of the legal system, as Chris Coma is telling Bannon, we could have a third term, maybe, but we have to follow rule X, Y, and Z. In other words, you have to supposedly take it through the Congress and get it ratified in an amendment or whatever the exact stipulation is. So there's always this appeal to the slow politics, to the slow time, through saying, yes, but somebody a long time ago who wasn't us made a rule, and surely they were wise, because we've been here for 200. We've been following the Copernican system all this 1,000 years, so it must be true, etc., etc. There's always some facile argument, which is at bottom maybe just the muscle memory behind these things. Can we break through to a more immediate, more perfect appraisal of the situation in this confused times? Let me just read one thing, and then that will be the last thing. I wrote a guy at UC Riverside about Wallerstein, saying, so some guy Christopher Chase Dunn is supposed to be taken over the work of Wallerstein and one of the big Wallerstein experts. And I said this, the problem is when I listen to Wallerstein, he always seems to take for granted what the exact criticism against Davos is, and it's always as though he expects that we already knew. And so he wrote back and he said, I agree, Emmanuel thought his scholarly colleagues and activist comrades understood. He seemed to think that the WEF was the political spearhead of neoliberal global capitalism. What this misses is that Schwab and his minions are a particular party within the transcontinental capitalist class, within which there is now and has been a struggle going on about how to deal with the polycrisis. The recent Schwabian ideas about stakeholders and reset illustrate this. Most of his fossil capitalists probably see these as understanding the greenwashing, or as window dressing, like greenwashing. What we need is a map of the contending factions within the transcontinental capitalist class. And then he starts listing some books that got it wrong, according to him, including, interestingly, Yanis Varoufakis's points a picture of the techno feudal factional, how does that call it, of the techno platform fraction. I'm not sure what the last word is. And erroneously claims that it has taken over. And then he lists some other books by Bill Carroll, by Chomsky, and Robert Poland, and some other stuff. Okay, so I mean, taking that, if these guys are all sort of confused about how to make a map of even what's going on, the whole Wallerstein crowd, and then you got guys like Richard Hudson. I've been listening to his account, which is also it seems to link up to what Epstein's doing with the he made this drawing of the fully depreciated woman in the I think it wasn't Trump, it was some other guy that was in the Mar-a-Lago club gave him something with that joke on it, which seems to indicate really that what Epstein was doing is he was telling people that they could fully depreciate their assets and write off all their taxes by doing that. Like, you have a bunch of property, and then you say, no, we didn't make any capital gains on it because of the resale value on all the hardwood floors or whatever there is no resale value on them, so therefore we're not even making the profit that we thought we would make, and therefore we don't have to pay any taxes. And then it's not even illegal, it's just that people like Giuliani or whoever pass municipal codes in order to attract businesses in, and it's the so-called famous race to the bottom of all these tax cuts that municipal localities are giving, like I got that wrong before about the number of employees, but this internet company that's in the Bay Area, which actually employs a lot of people, but which has got the big tax break of some kind in SF. I forget what they have, their own tall building, but I forget what it's called. But it's sort of like a bleeding edge tech company. Of course, there's many of them in the Bay Area. But in any case, this confusion over any clear version of sort of how these things are happening. I mean, what he says is basically Yeah, there's sort of a case for the depreciated assets as one of the main scams used. It's not really a scam though, that's the thing. It's legal, but one of the just the symptoms of how this breakdown is happening where um, there's not really a clear belief. So the way he sees it as the powers of corruption pulling, but the other way to look at it is there's not really a clear belief about what the line is between fair and unfair practice.